Good morning, and welcome to our forum. I thank Strathmore for hosting this important event today, and for the many partners who have organized a terrific schedule and agenda with public and private and nonprofit leaders who are here to share their ideas, but also challenge us to advance equitable development throughout the region. Today's program is made possible thanks to support from Amazon's Housing Equity Fund, which has been walking the walk with a $2 billion investment in affordable housing in their hometown cities, including $1 billion already deployed here in the DMV. Metro is excited to be part of today's conversation as we have an important role to play in advancing equitable transit-oriented development. In most communities, we are the T in TOD, and we're working hard to provide frequent, safe, and reliable service to communities across the region. But we're also a national leader in joint development, which simply means private development on transit-owned property. Since Metro opened in the 1970s, we have spurred the development of 17 million square feet at 30 stations, generating new riders and revenue for Metro, and nearly $200 million in annual state and local taxes. In our 10-year strategic plan for joint development, which we released earlier this year, we project another 30 million square feet at 40 stations could generate up to 26,000 new housing units, as well as another $300 million in annual taxes. I think Andrew Friedson said it better this morning at the groundbreaking. What that really means is we're transforming hundreds of acres of parking lots, surface parking lots, into places for people, jobs, housing, and taxes. We broke ground, as we mentioned, on our latest project this morning, Strathmore Square at Grosvenor Metro. When it's complete, it will total 2,100 mixed-income housing units, as well as bring new retail amenities and a 1.2-acre park. Through our joint development pipeline at Metro, we have an important opportunity to advance equity in the region. 70% of our future development sites are in or adjacent to equity emphasis areas, which COG recently identified as communities with higher concentrations of low and moderate income families and communities of color. We have an important opportunity to help drive more investment to areas of the region that need it most. To ensure that local residents of all incomes and all backgrounds can benefit from these opportunities, it takes intentional policies and partners. First of all, we need creative private sector partners like Five Squares Development, who's leading the development next door at Grosvenor Metro. These are complicated, complex projects with lots of challenges that we heard about this morning. It really takes dedicated, creative, thoughtful leaders on the private side to bring those forward. Another such partner is Amazon. Last year, WMATA and Amazon announced a partnership to create 1,000 affordable housing units at Metro stations by 2026, with a $125 million commitment in low-rate financing. In less than 1 year, Amazon has funded 1,043 affordable housing units at Metro stations at New Carrollton, College Park, Congress Heights, and Grosvenor. And those units will open 2 years from now, a full 2 years before our goal of 2026. So I think that's terrific and deserves a round of applause. But local jurisdictional partners are also critical to advancing equity. It's fitting that we're hosting this program today in Montgomery County, which was the first jurisdiction in the country to pass inclusionary zoning in the 1970s. They've also used their land use and zoning policy to prioritize height and density at transit locations. Despite this sound policy, Metro discovered that many of our planned developments were not able to support the higher construction cost of high-rise development. So developers were planning to forego hundreds of housing units and build 7-story buildings instead. As Christian Dorsey will no doubt talk about shortly, we have a housing shortage, and we can't afford to be building 40 and 50% of our housing potential. We need each and every unit. At ULI Washington event last week, Cheryl Court of Coalition for Smarter Growth aptly said, "We need to make it easier to build housing in the right locations and make it harder to build in the wrong ones." There's no better location for housing than on top of transit. That's why Montgomery County Council, with the leadership of Andrew Friedson and Hans Riemer, adopted a 15-year real estate tax abatement for high-rise residential development at Metro to ensure that these projects achieve their full potential. Strathmore Square is the first project to benefit from this new program and will result in hundreds more units, both market rate and affordable, thanks to Amazon's support. These tools have been instrumental in delivering more equitable TOD, and we're excited to discuss today what other tools are needed to accelerate housing production and advance equity. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Christian Dorsey, Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board and Board Chair of the Metropolitan Council of Governments. COG has been a regional leader in this conversation through its work, setting regional housing targets, and their recent work focused on high-capacity transit and equity emphasis areas. Please welcome Christian Dorsey.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Still morning, right? All right, beautiful. Hopefully you'll see a slide presentation. It says Region United to start. Good. All right. All the tech is working, then I'm ready to go. So as Liz introduced me, I am the Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board, and for 2022 serving as the Chair of the Board of the Council of Governments, a regional organization that hopefully tries to bring the best practices and the best thoughts that may exist within jurisdictions in our region so that all who could benefit and could utilize the learnings and the leanings of what has been leveraged elsewhere for their own communities. And this regional approach is critical if we're thinking about solving to scale the issues that we are all here to discuss today. Now, just to orient you a little bit if you're not familiar with COG, we are the planning organization for the region. We are the convening entity for the region. And to appreciate how complex a task that is, just take a look at this map of our region. The service area for the Council of Governments, it includes 24 local governments, but geographically we stretch as far north as bordering Pennsylvania, as far west as bordering West Virginia, and Charles County to our south. You go to St. Mary's County, and then you're in Delaware, right? So we're talking about a huge service area, and within that, we've got urban cores, very highly densely packed urban cores, all the way up to exurban and rural areas. So as we think about bringing this kind of region together, it requires a lot of work in order to get people on the same page, but also more importantly, to move in a focused direction in order to meet our extremely consequential goals. Now, this is not a new thing. COG for the past decade has been looking at what this region needs to maintain its position as one of the most important, effective, and dynamic regions in the entire United States. And as long ago as 2010, that was articulated in a vision. We called it then Region Forward, that focused on how to increase prosperity among those who live here, to ensure that there was an opportunity for the communities that they lived in to be safe and thriving, that we could also lean into environmental sustainability so that what we have could be preserved and enhanced for future generations, and that everyone could move throughout this region in such a way that provided ease of mobility. That was the vision. I think we could all agree that that's a reasonable and appropriate vision. The hard work then becomes how do you live up to it and how do you actually achieve it? So in the intervening decade, we've very much been looking at that very thing. What is required to get everyone in the region not only believing the right things, but moving in the right direction? And as the only regional entity, COG has had to accept its responsibility to do this. Now, for sure, there have been some exciting advancements. We are thrilled that when we think about prosperity, there has been a substantial movement in economic development. Nothing more newsworthy than the location of Amazon's HQ2 in our region, and of course in my home community of Arlington, Virginia, but that's another story for another day. That's in our region, and this level of economic development creates lots of opportunities that are shared throughout our region. Amazon's workers will come all throughout the DMV. They will utilize our public infrastructure to go to work. They will engage and visit all communities throughout in order to work and play. We've also had, over the course of the last decade, some pretty significant advancements in transit. Liz and Metro is a high priority for our region and for our COG, so when the need was to convene all of the necessary stakeholders to ensure that Metro had sufficient capital funding to erase the backlog of deferred repairs and also to bring the transit property to a state of modernization and safety, we leaned into that effort and ensured that all of the appropriate parties could not only understand the importance of Metro to our region, but had the technical assistance to come up with the right solutions that would enable the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia to meet their obligations in a way that were reasonable and appropriate for those communities. Also, Metro had some troubles maintaining a safe transit property, and in order to actually fix that, to come up with the governance structure in order to remediate those issues, it required revisiting a decades-long compact of all of the signatories who are a part of Metro to sort of figure out how to do it. And COG was the place that provided not only the table for those conversations to take place, but also became the home of the organization that is now the Metro Safety Commission. Over the course of the last 10 years, COG has leaned into the whole idea of sustainability and realizing that with careful planning, where in addition to transit and the need for, when necessary, roads to be built, that we didn't forget about the most sustainable forms of transportation, the most active forms of transportation, walking and biking, and coming up with a landmark addition to our long-range transportation plan to actually build up a National Capital Trail network, a bike beltway, if you will, so that we could allow those active modes to have the connectivity and the safety to move throughout our region. And when it comes to one of the things that COG has long been known for, addressing the federally required improvements in our region's historically bad air quality, we have had significant improvements over the last decade. 10 years ago, 1 out of every 10 days in our region was an unhealthy air day, according to federal guidelines. 1 in 10. 1 out of every 10 days was unhealthy. We have now, in 10 years, reduced that to less than 1 out of every 100 days. So a significant improvement in just a decade. But these accomplishments are not the end of the story, because we have persistent and significant challenges. And one of the areas in which we had never been structurally equipped to deal with the challenges comes with the notion of how you accommodate and plan for growth. So we know that this region is dynamic. It was before Amazon, and it will continue to be. And as a result of that, we know that there's going to be a growth in jobs and there's going to be a growth in people. But historically, we never really matched the whole idea of expected job growth with the planning that goes on within local jurisdictions to entitle housing. So what we had over decades was a buildup of structural unaffordability, increased demand for our region, variable and stagnating supply of home production, cost of those homes going up, people being displaced and marginalized, and creating all sorts of unintended and also undesirable consequences. So we as a board looked at the major issues facing our region and focused on a few. Housing production, to match what it is our expected demand will be, and then to name that number and then go above if we are going to create better opportunities for people in our region. Also, to have aggressive climate goals that go beyond what we think is attainable to reach for what is necessary. To maximize the incredible investments that are both existing and planned as it relates to high-capacity transit. And also to, for the first time, really, to give actual meaning to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion by coming up with planning concepts and tools where we could actually apply these to public policy actions and decisions so that we could improve the outcomes for people who are from racial and ethnic minorities that have been historically disadvantaged and or are low income. So what does this look like? We have taken the vision of Region forward. We have taken the planning efforts in those discrete areas and recognized that there is an interconnectivity between all of them. They require that they be thought of not in isolation and through siloed work, but in an interconnected way where we could actually achieve some significant change. We call it our Region United framework. Full details of it are on the web, but I'm going to kind of give you a little taste of it right now. As it relates to the original vision of livability, we see the work in our housing targets being most important. So as I previewed before, we were not actually keeping up structurally with housing demand. So when we did this analysis, we saw that the region was projecting on 245,000 units being built. But that was a shortfall for what was needed with expected job growth, a shortfall of 75,000 units. So the first thing this analysis called on, and it required everyone agreeing to it, was to up the number of up the production target to 320,000. But it was more than that. We also needed for 3/4 of those units to be located near the places where we have either existing or planned high-capacity transit infrastructure, which are the places where we're going to have our transit-oriented communities. And then furthermore, that there be a specific goal to address affordability by ensuring that the vast majority, 75% of those units, be available to low and moderate income households. Getting the region's leaders to agree to this in public, on the record, is a big deal. Because, you know, and I don't say this to disparage elected officials, I'm one of them, but there is a willingness to embrace rhetoric that often doesn't necessarily match action. And this kind of action is significant because it creates an expectation not only among you, but people in our community that this is the work that we are going to try to do. This is how we're going to evaluate our success. I couldn't be prouder of the colleagues in the COG board who took this step knowing full well what it would require. And make no mistake, this is a stretch goal. So the Great Recession was the trough where we were only producing about 10,000 units. In order to meet our goals, we need to be producing around 33,000 units per year. We are not there yet, but we are moving in that direction. And I think with the target outline, it has provided a way for local jurisdictions to really, really work at their own particular piece of the regional puzzle, and we're seeing some great efforts to get there. As it relates to our high-capacity transit areas, the places that we want to enliven as transit-oriented communities, we have had some significant work, and I just want you to look at sort of where these areas are. They exist throughout our service area, and they include metro for heavy rail, they include commuter rail, they include bus rapid transit, some light rail, and also some areas that are multimodal collections of various high-capacity transit options. And it's significant because when it comes to efficient land use, this is a wonderful thing. I mean, these areas are about 10% of our region's land mass, but they're going to accommodate more than half of our future jobs and nearly half of our future population. So it's incredibly important that we maximize and optimize these areas through a combination of activities. One, to make sure that the service that is available is safe and it's reliable, it's frequent, it's useful, but also to make sure that when it comes to these areas, the land use is right-sized so that we have the appropriate mix of uses and places where we can have dense housing, we can have commercial and retail opportunities, and that we also take care of the infrastructure around it. Again, it's not just the big stuff, it's also the little things, sidewalk connections, and looking at your service delivery programs to make sure that these areas are optimized. As it relates to prosperity, you know, for a long time, people looked at prosperity in the aggregate. You know, let's look at average incomes, let's look at big numbers, and let's pat ourselves on the back at how incredibly prosperous we are. The work at COG over the last decade has tried to actually make sure that we're telling the real story and looking at it through the lens of equity. Who is this prosperity for, and do people have an opportunity to broadly share in it? And of course, the answer when you come at it through that lens is a little more disappointing. But nonetheless, it requires that we rethink prosperity in a way that emphasizes those who have been historically left out of the region's growth and vibrancy. And so as part of that, we created a planning tool called Equity Emphasis Areas. These identify census tracts that either have a high concentration of historically disadvantaged minorities or persons who are earning, households who are earning significantly lower incomes than median. And as we map these out throughout our area, we see that they exist in all areas. Roughly 30% of all of the census tracts in the region are designated as equity emphasis areas under the COG methodology. They don't necessarily include a lot of land area, and there's also significant overlap with high capacity transit areas, creating a lot of opportunity for us to lean into this whole idea of bringing prosperity for all and not being comfortable that the region is prosperous based on aggregated data. We're looking more closely at how really all communities are faring. So we're excited that this planning tool has had great utility for many jurisdictions in many different disciplines and lines of business. We've seen people use this to apply their planning dollars for roadway safety and where they're going to, of course, locate housing, which is one of the most important ones, to focus on anti-displacement as well as new production strategies. It was key during the pandemic when thinking about the nature of public health and how to keep communities safe that housed a great concentration of our region's essential workers. It's been important in thinking about what are the really significant places where we can improve our climate resilience. And of course, opportunity. Areas that have been left behind are ripe, if done with intentionality and with purpose, to create new opportunity for people that can result in great gains in productivity and growth, in addition to improving the lives of people who have historically been left out of opportunities in our region. And as it relates to sustainability, we get really aggressive with this in the Washington metro region, and I'm proud to say that COG has really laid out some targets that the region has embraced and that are quite ambitious. First, we are looking at a 2050 goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80%. We set that goal and we've targeted baselines based on 2005, and we've tracked our progress on an interim basis throughout. In fact, we were kind of looking a couple of years ago and realizing we didn't really have any interim milestones between 2020 and 2050. And within that long period of time, that's a lot of time where you can sort of fall off. And if you're not serious, that gap of time can produce an inability to course correct. So we decided that we wanted to set an interim goal looking at 2030, where we were halfway to our goal, or more than halfway, at a 50% reduction, so that if we needed to, we could course correct in order to meet the 2050 goal. Now, I'm happy to say that we've looked at 2020, and we found out that we have achieved the 20% reduction that would be necessary. So the great news is, when we think about these big climate change goals, success is possible. We are on track. Now, that doesn't mean we take the foot off of the electric car, but it does mean that we have a record where we are achieving progress, and that should give us comfort that we can continue on the right path. And we know the right path because we've identified what the big greenhouse gas emitters are. They come from our electricity, our source power. And if we're able to make improvements in expanding renewables and cleaning our grid and also addressing the built environment and the energy consumption in buildings, we are gonna move a long way towards success. There are lots of other different areas that COG has leaned into making sure the region doesn't forget the low-hanging fruit. So we've got this approach where we are providing technical expertise to jurisdictions to help them do the big things, but also the little things, because it's a collection of all of that that's going to get us to our 2050 goal. And that's really what the Council of Governments has tried to do for the region. Let's get beyond just planning and articulating what we want, but focusing on getting us there by accelerating the action. And so as you look at this slide that includes a lot of different transformational efforts that are going on throughout the region, COG has tried to lend value whenever we can, whether it is the comprehensive zoning rewrite in Prince George's County, whether it is the significantly expanded approach to updating Washington, D.C.'s comprehensive plan, or in my own community in Arlington County, Virginia, where we're pursuing zoning reform to include previously prohibited so-called missing middle housing types. A lot of great efforts going on through this region that COG wants to support, and it's producing results. Washington, D.C. has leaned into the housing targets and set their goal to match what we have analyzed is required from the district with 36,000 units by 2025. Similarly, in Alexandria, Virginia, a goal by 2030 to significantly up what they were planning on producing. In Arlington, Virginia, over the last 4 years, we have entitled 9,000 units. 12% of them have been affordable, and we have 3,300 under construction at this very moment in 2022. People are taking the housing targets and running with it in ways that please me greatly, for sure. As we look at another element that we cannot forget, it is the role of the private sector. And I so appreciate Amazon, not only for making Arlington their home of HQ2, for embracing and endorsing the changes that we've seen in our region, but also for following through with being a model for how the private sector can be involved in regional transformation and change. Liz talked about the $2 billion investment that they're making across their communities and the $1 billion that's already been committed here. That's on top of over $100 million in grants to support community organizations. That's on top of work that they have done working with the Council of Governments to more specifically accelerate projects that may be not eligible or easily able to access capital to get jump-started. It's been an incredible partnership and contribution that shows how everybody can work together. And we're pleased to provide a forum and a place where those connections and the need can be established for all parties to lean into. And you heard about WMATA being a leader in joint development nationally. We are pleased to support that work, and we know that the underutilized potential historically will produce great benefits in achieving the transit-oriented communities that we all desire. And so I know I ran through a lot of slides really quickly, but I wanted to make sure we stayed on track today. This is all encapsulated in our Region United framework, and COG endeavors to really be the place that provides, again, not only the venue, but the expertise to help us realize our goals. One of the things that we should all walk away from these forums understanding is that it's one thing to articulate the right path, and there's quite the other thing to actually proceed down it. And we are at a place where we have to actually figure out how to keep all momentum towards moving down that path. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share where we are, to make very clear that our work is not yet done, and that we're going to need all of the creative thoughts and efforts from all of you if we're going to continue making this region not only the dynamic place that is a welcome home to so many, but is a model for what regional transformation can look like for others. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit with you, and I don't know who I introduce next, so I'm kind of stalling until I get a sense here, but thank you all very much. I appreciate it.